So this is a reading of the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle length discourses of the Buddha. So it's Sutta number 43. It's titled The Great Classification. So the Nikayas are part of early Buddhism, books of early Buddhism, or known as Theravada Buddhism. So this conversation is between Venerable Mahakotthita and Venerable Sariputta. Sariputta was one of the chief disciples of the Buddha. And he became enlightened, fully enlightened as an arhat with the guidance of the Buddha. And also because his own mind was ripe for enlightenment. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. So Anathapindika was a rich layman who had so much faith in the Buddha and fully supported his ministry. And he was a rich banker, but he gave most of his wealth away to support the Buddha and his disciples, and so that they can spread the Dharma in India. Then in the late afternoon, Venerable Mahakotthita came out of retreat, went to Venerable Sariputta, and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to Sariputta, "Reverend, they speak of a witless person. How is a witless person identified?" "Reverend, they are called witless because they don't understand." "And what don't they understand?" "They don't understand. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. They are called witless because they don't understand." So these are the Four Noble Truths. They can be understood if you are able to see your experiences relating to these Four Noble Truths. And of course, not everyone's minds are so clear, so it helps to listen to wise teachers. And for me, myself, I learned the Four Noble Truths from Buddhist teachers and related it to my own experience. So of course, I already experienced the Four Noble Truths, but I couldn't really put them down into or categorize them into these four. And having categorized them and having experienced them, it helped me with my understanding. So of course, when they say understanding in the Theravada Buddhism, when you fully understood the Four Noble Truths, you are considered enlightened. Saying, "Good Reverend," Mahakotthita approved and agreed with what Sariputta said. Then he asked another question. "They speak of a wise person. How is a wise person defined?" "They are called wise because they understand." "And what do they understand?" "They understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, and this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. They are called wise because they understand." They speak of consciousness. How is consciousness defined? It's called consciousness because it cognizes. And what does it cognize? It cognizes pleasure and pain and neutral. It's called consciousness because it cognizes. Wisdom and consciousness, are these things mixed or separate? And can we completely dissect them? So as to describe the difference between wisdom and consciousness? Wisdom and consciousness, these things are mixed. They are not separate. And you can never completely dissect them so as to describe the difference between them. For you understand what you cognize, and you cognize what you understand. That's why these things are mixed, not separate, and you can never completely dissect them so as to describe the differences between them. Wisdom and consciousness. What is the difference between these things that are mixed, not separate? The difference between these things is that wisdom should be developed, while consciousness should be completely understood. They speak of this thing called feeling. How is feeling defined? It's called feeling because it feels. And what does it feel? It feels pleasure, pain, and neutral feelings. It's called feeling because it feels. They speak of this thing called perception. How is perception defined? It's called perception because it perceives. And what does it perceive? It perceives blue, yellow, red, and white. It's called perception because it perceives. So if I didn't understand wrongly, perception has to do with memory. And memory, the interpretation of memory is perception, and it leads to karma. Feeling, perception, and consciousness. Are these things mixed or separate? And can we completely dissect them so as to describe the difference between them? Feeling, perception, and consciousness. These things are mixed, not separate. And you can never completely dissect them so as to describe the difference between them. For you perceive what you feel. And you cognize what you perceive. That's why these things are mixed, not separate. And you can never completely dissect them so as to describe the difference between them. What can be known by purified mind consciousness released from the five senses? Aware that space is infinite, it can know the dimension of infinite space. Aware that consciousness is infinite, it can know the dimension of infinite consciousness. Aware that there is nothing at all, it can know the dimension of nothingness. How do you understand something that can be known? You understand something that can be known with the eye of wisdom. What is the purpose of wisdom? The purpose of wisdom is direct knowledge, complete understanding, and giving up. How many conditions are there for the arising of right view? There are two conditions for the arising of right view: the words of another and proper attention. These are the two conditions for the arising of right view. When right view is supported by how many factors, does it have freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruit and benefit? When right view is supported by five factors, it has freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruit and benefit. It's when right view is supported by ethics, learning, discussion, serenity, and discernment. When right view is supported by these five factors, it has freedom of heart and freedom by wisdom as its fruit and benefit. How many states of existence are there? Reverend, there are these three states of existence. Existence in the central realm, the realm of luminous form, and the formless realm. But how is there rebirth into a new state of existence in the future? It's because of sentient beings shrouded by ignorance and fettered by craving, chasing pleasure in various realms. That's how there is rebirth into a new state of existence in the future. But how is there no rebirth into a new state of existence in the future? It's when ignorance fades away, knowledge arises, and craving ceases. That's how there is no rebirth into a new state of existence in the future. But what reverence is the first absorption? Reverence is when a mendicant, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first absorption, which has rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. This is called the absorption. So this is also known as jhanas in Theravada Buddhism. Jhana is also translated into Chan and Zen. So it can be quite misleading because I used to think that in order to develop jhana, I need to be secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, in the sense that I need to be strictly in a retreat environment. So of course, being in a retreat environment is very helpful, but when it says quite secluded from sensual pleasures, it means that you have understood the Four Noble Truths to a certain degree, that you are willing to give up certain sensual pleasures, knowing that when the sensual pleasure ends, there is pain, and the end of pain is a return to sensual pleasure. So you can see this circling around of as if you are locked in this prison of such feelings. So when you have realized that there will be a certain giving up in your heart and in your mind of chasing sensual pleasures, even while you're living in the city amidst sensual pleasures. So I think being secluded is really true. Secluded from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities is really doable if you have been practicing meditation and reading and listening to wise teachers, even in the comfort of your home. Okay, so I'll continue. But how many factors does the first absorption have, or the first jhana? The first absorption has 5 factors. When a mendicant has entered the first absorption, placing the mind, keeping it connected, rapture, bliss, and unification of mind are present. That's how the first absorption has 5 factors. So again, I was, because of my ignorance, thinking that I can only experience jhanas in the forest or in a strict retreat condition. So that isn't true as well. Again, if you have diligently meditated, contemplated, and discerned your experiences, even in the comfort of your home, you can also experience the first jhana in your daily life while you're doing activities. Okay, so, and it can be experienced not by too much effort, nor too little effort, but rather by a clarity of mind, understanding your day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience and letting them go. And you can actually experience this rapture, or rather, I think rapture is too strong a word, rather delight, bliss, and unification of mind. So of course, the mind must be united in order to experience this. And the interesting thing is, of course, this delight and this bliss does not come from sensual pleasures. It is not caused by sensual pleasures. So it does not have an underlying tendency of greed within it. There's no greed in this absorption. So I'll continue. But how many factors has the first absorption given up? And how many does it possess? The first absorption has given up 5 factors and possesses 5 factors. When a mendicant has entered the first absorption, sensual desire, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt are given up, placing the mind, keeping it connected. Rapture, bliss, and unification of mind are present. That's how the first absorption has given up 5 factors and possesses 5 factors. Reverend, these 5 faculties have different scopes and different ranges and don't experience each other's scope and range. That is, the faculties of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. What do these 5 faculties, with their different scopes and ranges, have recourse to? What experiences their scopes and ranges? These 5 faculties, with their different scopes and ranges, have recourse to the mind, and the mind experiences their scopes and ranges. These 5 faculties depend on what to continue. These 5 faculties depend on life to continue. But what does life depend on to continue? Life depends on warmth, the feeling of warmth to continue. Life depends on warmth to continue. But what does warmth depend on to continue? Warmth depends on life to continue. Just now I understood you to say life depends on warmth to continue, but I also understood you said warmth depends on life to continue. How then should we see the meaning of this statement? Well then, Reverend, I shall give you a simile. For by means a simile, some sensible people understand the meaning of what is said. Suppose there was an oil lamp burning. The light? Suppose there was an oil lamp burning. The light appears dependent on the flame, and the flame appears dependent on the light. In the same way, life depends on warmth to continue, and warmth depends on life to continue. Are the life forces the same things as the phenomena that are felt? Or are they different things? The life forces are not the same things as the phenomena that are felt. For if the life forces and the phenomena that are felt were the same things, a mendicant who had attained the cessation of perception and feeling would not emerge from it. But because the life forces and the phenomena that are felt are different things, a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling can emerge from it. How many things must this body lose before it lies forsaken, tossed aside, like an insentient log? The body must lose 3 things before it lies forsaken, tossed aside, like an insentient log. These 3 things are vitality, warmth, and consciousness. What's the difference between someone who has passed away and a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling? When someone dies, their physical, verbal, and mental processes have ceased and stilled. Their vitality is spent, their warmth is dissipated, and their faculties have disintegrated. When a mendicant has attained the cessation of perception and feeling, their physical, verbal, and mental processes have ceased and stilled, but their vitality is not spent, their warmth is not dissipated, and their faculties are very clear. That's the difference between someone who has passed away and a mendicant who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling. How many conditions are necessary to attain the neutral release of the heart? 4 conditions are necessary to attain the neutral release of the heart: giving up pleasure and pain, and ending former happiness and sadness. A mendicant enters and remains in the 4th absorption, without pleasure or pain, with pure equanimity and mindfulness. These 4 conditions are necessary to attain the neutral release of the heart. How many conditions are necessary to attain the sightless release of the heart? Two conditions are necessary to attain the sightless release of the heart: not focusing on any signs and focusing on the sightless. These two conditions are necessary to attain the sightless release of the heart. How many conditions are necessary to remain in the sightless release of the heart? 3 conditions are necessary to remain in the sightless release of the heart: not focusing on any signs, focusing on the sightless, and the previous determination. These 3 conditions are necessary to remain in the sightless release of the heart. How many conditions are necessary to emerge from the sightless release of the heart? 2 conditions are necessary to emerge from the sightless release of the heart: focusing on all signs and not focusing on the sightless. These 2 conditions are necessary to emerge from the sightless release of the heart. The limitless release of the heart, and the release of the heart through nothingness, and the release of the heart through emptiness, and the sightless release of the heart. Do these things differ in both meaning and phrasing? Or do they mean the same thing and differ only in the phrasing? There is a way in which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing. But there is also a way in which they mean the same thing and differ only in the phrasing. And what's the way in which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing? Firstly, a mendicant meditates spreading a heart full of love to one direction, and to the second, and to the third, and to the fourth. In the same way above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. They meditate spreading a heart full of compassion. They meditate spreading a heart full of rejoicing. They meditate spreading a heart full of equanimity to one direction, and to the second, and to the third, and to the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of equanimity to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. This is called the limitless release of the heart. And what is the release of the heart through emptiness? And what is the release of the heart through nothingness? It's when a mendicant, going totally beyond the dimension of infinite consciousness, aware that there is nothing at all, enters and remains in the dimension of nothingness. This is called the heart's release through nothingness. And what is the release of the heart through emptiness? It's when a mendicant has gone to a wilderness, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty heart and reflects like this: this is empty of a self, or what belongs to a self. This is called the release of the heart through emptiness. And what is the sightless release of the heart? Is when a mendicant, not focusing on any signs, enters and remains in the sightless immersion of the heart. This is called the sightless release of the heart. This is the way in which these things differ in both meaning and phrasing. And what's the way in which they mean the same thing and differ only in phrasing? Greed, hate, and delusion are makers of limits, meaning they limit our mind. A mendicant who has ended the defilements has given this up, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them, so they are unable to arise in the future. The unshakable release of the heart is said to be the best kind of limitless release of the heart. That unshakable release of the heart is empty of greed, hate, and delusion. Greed is something, hate is something, and delusion is something. A mendicant who has ended the defilements has given this up, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them, so they are unable to arise in the future. The unshakable release of the heart is said to be the best kind of release of the heart through nothingness. The unshakable release of the heart is empty of greed, hate, and delusion. Greed, hate, and delusion are makers of signs. A mendicant who has ended the defilements has given up these, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, and obliterated them, so they are unable to arise in the future. The unshakable release of the heart is said to be the best kind of silence release of the heart. That unshakable release of the heart is empty of greed, hate, and delusion. This is the way in which they mean the same thing and differ only in the phrasing. This is what Venerable Sariputta said. Satisfied, Venerable Mahakotita was happy with what Sariputta said.